Okay. Well, Michael, thanks very much for joining us on this session this afternoon. This is the fireside session, which is the follow-up to a conversation that we had within the Forbes Technology Council a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's an incredibly topical question. It's around cyber diplomacy, cyber conflict. We have a situation right now where the world is truly in a state of turmoil. There is a big increased level of cyber activity right across the board, and folks don't always think about it as we look at in our industry, we look at ransomware, etc., but we don't often think that it's how much of it is actually state sponsored, and so therefore how important it is to consider engaging in cyber diplomacy. And so this talk was enlightening for the council at Forbes, and I hope that you don't mind, spending some additional time really talking to us in a broader context. This is not a closed door event, and sharing with the viewers and the attendees what your analysis of the situation is, and then perhaps you could also run through the ethos and really the goals and objectives of what the National AI and Cybersecurity ISAO is all about. So the floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you so much. Yeah, when I, for the first time, held this talk, actually, like last year, I didn't expect it to get this amount of positive reaction to it, because it's a very, like you said, the topic doesn't really touch industry immediately. Like it's not top of mind. You don't think about it every day, because we're so much in ransomware and so much in dealing with data protection from a perspective of data breaches from criminals or malicious insiders or even unintended insiders, that we don't think about cyber warfare or next-gen warfare or like the societal stressors, these agents of change that we're going through. So if you permit me, I will deal with the technology side here for a second and share my screen. I hope that this works without any type of problem.
Please, thank you very much. And folks on the viewing side, this is intended to be a conversation. So please feel free to let your questions come across in real time, and we'll address them as we go along, and we'll make plenty of time at the very end for additional discussion.
All right. Is everybody able to see my shares?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Perfect. Then let's start. So briefly, just the mission statement of the NIC ISAO. So we are here to support U.S. national security, increase economic competitiveness, and cultivate digital diplomacy, and supporting information exchange with our allies. So it's all about capacity enablement or capacity enhancement across this trusted community, whether that's academia, industry, or government. Speaker profile, we're going to skip that. You probably know me. So what we will discuss today is we have what we call the agents of change, and that is the age of great power competition, the rapid introduction of emerging technology, and what I call next-gen warfare. I'm using this here very broadly as a term, by the way. And the reason we're discussing this is because this kind of sets the stage for why public-private partnership and cyber diplomacy is so important nowadays, and why you, if you're in business, as your businesses are parts of society, your employees and family members are parts of society, should care about this, because society is under the influence of those agents of change and basically at their mercy at this point. All right, let's discuss the first thing very broadly. We don't need to spend a lot of time here. The age of great power competition. There are no secrets here. Number one, we have what we in the US call the imminent threat, that is Russia. And this is very clearly evidenced by the recent unprovoked and brutal attack on Ukraine. The second threat is China. That's called the pacing threat. So the future threat. And we have a couple of conflict of interests here. Of course, there's the conflict regarding the sovereignty of Taiwan. And then we have issues with this South Chinese Sea. And those two are in great power competition with the EU, with the United States. And with that, you being a part of those societies, this is something that you need to understand, specifically when we're talking about how does that relate to the next agent of change, which is emerging technology. And finally, how that affects cyber warfare, cybercrime, and everything related to that. When we talk about emerging technology today, we're just briefly discussing AI. There's, of course, many other things that are going on. I think there's a lot of enhancements, a lot of developments happening actually in the biotech space as well. But for today's talk, given what an ISAO does, and that this is about cybersecurity and cyber warfare, AI is the big thing. And what we're talking about here is the commoditization of that. So AI is nothing new. And again, I'm using the term very broad, but it's being increasingly widespread used across societies. Across our societies, not only for major businesses, but small businesses, in government, and with that, of course, also by law enforcement, militaries, and intelligence agencies. With the use of AI come great opportunities, but also wherever there's a great reward, there's a great risk. Now, keep in mind, we have great power competition, and we have rapid advancements happening in AI. If those two things come together, and we are now talking about another development, you will see that all these things are kind of enhancing each other, and with that, raising the risk for you as parts of society and for society in overall. And that brings us to a challenge also, which is that we, regarding emerging technology, need to ensure what is the responsible use here. And we need to drive a dialogue, and we need to make sure we're keeping the balance between innovation, harm prevention, and private-public partnerships are one way of driving this dialogue. And of course, cyber diplomacy and international outreach are other ways to drive this dialogue, to kind of harmonize our position, our stance on that as Western societies, as trusted partners. Now, all of this works together and gets together with next-gen, hybrid warfare, whatever you want to call it. Different countries have different names for it, different practitioners use these terms differently. I want to use this really in layman's terms here. We're just going to say next-gen warfare for a second. There's the Russian way. And the Russian way basically, out of my perspective, is how it all started as a strategic concept, or made it basically into the public realm, I want to say. And it's often attributed to Gerasimov, even though that is highly challenged and highly questionable, but doesn't matter. Here we let the man speak for himself, and that is basically that, number one, wars are no longer declared. Number two, we're not only talking anymore about broad conventional conflict like you're seeing it in Ukraine, but next-gen warfare deals also with what happens before that conventional high-intensity warfare. And as you can see here, we're dealing with applied methods of conflict that include political, economic, information, unitarian, and other non-military measures implied in coordination with the protest potential of the population. So now we're talking misinformation as well. Think about now AI, that is the capability enhancer for a lot of the tools that are being used in order to actually have this kind of effect. And finally, of course, these, well, you had economic means, informational means are all supplemented by military means as necessary. In the beginning, mostly with concealed characters, special operations forces, and so on. Anyways, why did they come up with that? And this is not unique to Russia, but why is this here? And this has to do with changes in society. Number one, our values have changed. Self-actualization is a thing. We are all having our own goals. We're all pursuing individual liberty. And with that, it is increasingly difficult to get societies to want to go to war. Hyper-awareness, our awareness culture and the awareness industry have a positive effect at times, which is we all can see war and we all see how horrific it is. You can no longer hide that, which makes people even less want to engage in war. All of that then drive budget priorities. And this is just an example. This was the UK Navy, 1982 versus 2019. You can see how much it was scaled down. Now it's being scaled up again. But all of this kind of means you have to do more with less. You have to do it in a covert way. And you have to hopefully achieve most of your objectives before you ever get into conventional war. The how is exactly what Gerasimov said. So you take all of these things and you apply all of these across a ladder of escalation. Okay, well, what about China? well, I actually was in China in 2018 as part of a delegation of the International Standards Organization, and they gave us a tour of their National Security Industrial Base and the National Security Cyber Training Center. And it was very clear how China was thinking about conflict as well. With that, also about pre-conflict, the stages or the parts of NextGen Warfare, and how much they emphasize cyber security and cyber warfare as part of that. The new Cybersecurity Training Center in Wuhan is thought to be able to graduate about 60,000 operators per year. Just put this number into your head, 60,000. Now, we can discuss quality issues here for sure, but in general, you have 60,000 operators. And now let's think about the motive, great power competition. Now think about the effect that AI has as an enhancer and enabler for those 60,000 operators, potential 60,000 operators. And you can see how cyber is becoming more and more an important component of conflict and is used because of next-gen warfare doctrine in different ways than just the most overt ways. We'll talk about this in a little bit later. What about the US? Well, everybody's kind of pursuing similar concepts here. This is something that's called JADC, JADAC2, and it just shows a similar thing, the usage of AI, machine learning, predictive analytics to enhance the decision-making process, and uses basically across all warfighting domains with partners to deliver an information advantage. This doesn't necessarily talk about like unconventional warfare or hidden warfare, but you can again see how the nature changes. We also have these concept of mosaic and network warfare and the Internet of military things. This is very important to understand because one thing that people don't understand at all is what cyber actually is. We all think about cyber as like, or not all, but a lot of people think about cyber as like setting networks up and protecting networks and flipping switches and configurations of routers. But cyber is truly wherever there's technology being used, there is cyber. And actually that's the definition of cyber as well. And that is giving you this weird thing because it means that cyber is amorphous. It is an information enabler, it's a kinetic enabler, it's a weapon, it's a domain, it is kind of everything. And when I was with the International Standards Organization, we created this definition at one point, which was what is cybersecurity? And why we never put it into a document, but the first thing we came up with was cybersecurity is protecting society in the information age. It's something incredibly broad. And this changes perception if you really start realizing what this means. Because everybody, when they talk about cyber warfare, primarily thinks the thing on the left. Cyber as a direct action component. So me taking down a power plant, me turning off the lights in a city, those kind of things. They don't think about how cyber enables information gathering or how cyber enables kinetic strikes, for example. Those things aren't really considered. And this then leads to statements and the false opinions that cyber isn't a major component of conflict nowadays. Well, I disagree with that wholeheartedly. And I also disagree with the, or not disagree, but actually then the future trajectory, emerging technology usage, and great power competition just means it will become more and more relevant and more broadly used, which means it is, again, more and more important to increase the resiliency of our societies, and with that, the resiliency of our businesses. Cyber as a domain, I talked about briefly. Just look at the different pieces that are in here. We again have the military component, the intelligence component, the information component. I really like this model because it shows how cyber permeates across borders throughout societies. But what you also see in here is crime. And we should be like, whoa, wait a second, why is crime mentioned here? We're talking about nation states. How does this relate? Well, that's because what we learn in the textbooks about cyber is a highly simplified model at times, right? We were taught like we have these we have script kiddies, we have activists, we have nation state, and we have cyber criminals, and they are like different people. That's whenever is life that simple? Never. Cybercrime is a way to evade sanctions. If your regime is heavily sanctioned and is bleeding for cash, that's a way to raise cash. Cybercrime is a way to raise cash for covert operations. So there is a lot of interplay potentially between state actors and cybercrime organizations. In some cases, this might be direct by hiring, looking at Russia. In other cases, this might just be by affiliation. And surprise, surprise, what have we seen? The major cybercrime organizations or the major hacking organizations in the world aligned themselves either with Russia or with Western society in Ukraine. And are currently basically at war with each other as a result of that. So this is important for you to know as business owners, because in business, many owners say, oh, well, I don't need to worry about nation state threats. That's nothing for me. I'm too small. I'm not important enough. I don't need to worry about that. Well, it's not that I disagree with the statement, but it's based on a flawed risk assessment. You don't know whether you need to worry about it because A, mostly the interplay of cybercrime and nation state is misunderstood, and B, you probably don't understand whether you might actually fit into a very much extended supply chain of a target that then makes you a valid target for a state actor that or an allied party to a state actor that has almost unlimited resources. So you do have to take it into account for your risk assessments, and you have to develop mitigation strategies. But how is this going to work? Because the problem is we have a societal challenge here, which is you can't protect everything as society, right? This is why we have critical infrastructure protection programs. We want to mostly guard our crown jewels, but supply chain extends and attackers go for the supplier of your supplier of your supplier. The next thing is attacker just needs to be right once. We defenders always need to be right, and there's only that many of us. So we are disadvantaged from the get-go. That brings us to the ultimate challenge, and how do we protect society at large? And my answer to that is strength in numbers. That brings us to forms of public-private partnership like the ISAO, but also other forms. That brings us to the importance of international outreach, cyber diplomacy, and working across borders, because cyber does not care about borders. This is why information exchange is so important. This is why capability enhancement is so important. Now I'm going to blow through the last remaining slides so we can actually get to the open conversation and questions. What is an ISAO? Well, it's an abbreviation for Information Sharing and Analysis Organization. It's a type of NGO that was defined by an executive order of President Obama, engaged in knowledge, best practice information sharing, intelligence, cyber intelligence sharing. Very important. We're not the US government. We don't receive a paycheck by the US government. It's an NGO. The type of NGO was defined by executive order. And basically, our domain that we share this across is cybersecurity and AI. We do a lot of domestic and outreach and engagement. Again, this is outreach and engagement. These organizations are not our partners. We're not part of them. I'm going to go through this. These are some of the organizations we talk with on a regular basis domestically, that we have information exchanges with or that we are part of. We also have international outreach with many organizations that we are either, again, part of or at least talking to on attending their events, which includes also the American Chambers of Commerce in the Baltic countries. We're going to talk about why Baltic countries in a second. So again, why cyber diplomacy then? Well, number one, if we want to protect society at large, and cyber and emerging technologies are used throughout our societies, then we need to turn the conversation from a military and intel one to a civilian-led one. And this is why I was such a huge fan of the announcement of the Department of State of actually starting a true cyber diplomacy effort with dedicated resources. The military and intelligence channels, law enforcement channels are extremely important, and they exist, and they will continue to exist the way they have been, but they're close communities. And they have to focus on the crown jewels. The problem is, again, how do you extend this umbrella? And that is where the civilian conversation is so incredibly important. And this is why it's also important to create these mutually beneficial relationships with like-minded allies, countries, organizations in there. It's also in self-interest of every nation because our economies are connected. US businesses have subsidiaries in Latvia today, right? I just recently saw LabCorp and hiring for data scientists in Latvia. Because of this connectedness, we must have information channels, communication channels, and capabilities in place to work with each other. In order to do that, we created a Cyber Diplomacy and Outreach Working Group, and our efforts are concentrated in Eastern Europe, specifically in the Baltics, Riga, where I will be until July this year, and then very, very brand new in Bogota in Latin America as well. We picked the Baltics for very obvious reasons. Number one, NATO's Cyber Corporate Defense Center of Excellence is in Tallinn. The Stratcom Center of Excellence is in Riga. And obviously, the Baltics are a key focal point of when it comes to great power competition. The general idea here is we have outreach engagement, we discussed this, norm setting, that is participation in regulatory and standards forums. We'll talk about this in a second. Capacity building, holding trainings, working with education providers, and finally, developing commercial opportunities. Because again, if we increase commercial opportunities between like-minded nations, and we are helping each other with providing the services and products that we individually are each best at, that just makes us all stronger and provides for better societies. Cyber diplomatic outreach examples. I recently spoke at the Pan-Baltic conference of the American Chambers of Commerce here, but we also speak at a lot of domestic events. Influencing, we were part of the NIST, National Institute for Standards and Technology, AI risk management framework development. We submitted comments there on the framework, attended the meetings, and we also are part of what's called NICE, the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, and we submit comments and feedback there as well to develop the norms that set the game, which, by the way, is something that China is involved in as well from their perspective as a strategy. Capacity building, we recently held an event together with OSAC and the Amsterdam Latvia that was attended, I think by like something 30, 40 training participants, which was emergency preparedness and business continuity. Those things we do in order to spread knowledge, build capacity, but also we do these things for free. So, and by doing so, we're being introduced to the business communities that help us, well, I would say, establish these important information exchange channels. Well, anyways, this is basically the end of the presentation that I had, and I think we should now go into the open conversation round. Now I have some water.
Thank you, Michael. This is an astonishing presentation. I could listen to it over and over, quite honestly. I think right now in this world, cyber is something that keeps on transcending everything, right? So cyberspace transcends borders, right? And that's already something that makes it essential to engage in cyber diplomacy. But at the same time, cyber diplomacy is no longer restricted to just diplomats, right? So I'd like to ask you, how do you view that? Because it's for all the stakeholders, perhaps, like the private sector, like nonprofits, like the ISAO. It's for it opens up the game and the possibility to actually build collaboration and resiliency across nations. What's your perspective on how folks can engage in cyber diplomacy and whether it's something that they should do?
Well, I think I want to start actually briefly a little bit earlier, right? I served on the delegation of two organizations, first of a industry association, and then actually on the United States national delegation to what's called the International Standards Organization. That was before the Department of State got majorly involved with their cyber diplomacy effort and anything. This, I think I started doing this in 2012, if I correctly remember. And when I did that, it was sometimes very, very uncomfortable because you could see that, for example, China was heavily engaged, heavily involved, had a lot of delegates attending these events, and was really making sure that their perspectives were included in global standards that impact technology, impact societies. And in the US, or in actually not only US, from Western countries, we didn't have this participation. So when you're dealing with what is clearly a very well concerted effort from another nation state, and you feel like there's nobody there that backs you up, because you're industry. At the end of the day, we were industry, right? Industry and NGOs. it was almost sometimes feeling A, inappropriate, and B, like out of place. You were like, how I have to now figure out how to deal with what is a Chinese government effort by myself, because I am a technology expert in a standardization forum. I hope that now that the Department of State is getting involved in this more, and that cyber, generally speaking, is becoming more of a topic at the leadership levels of governments, that this will lead to their engagement in those standardization forums, and of course, makes them a driving factor in these cross-border interchanges. Because what I have seen is beforehand, it was mostly actually industry people that were doing this, which is, I don't think, 100% correct. Now, this doesn't mean that cyber diplomacy is only a thing for governments, like you correctly said. NGOs always have been an important part. I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at how ISO is registered, right? It's an NGO. It's just an NGO with a special status because another NGO, the UN, gave it consultatory membership status, and these are super important NGOs. So NGOs have been around in this game, maybe not cyber, but in general, international relations forever as well. So if you want to get involved as an individual, I think, besides officially becoming a diplomat for the US government and joining that, becoming involved in an NGO, nonprofit like the ISAO, is a way of being able to have this kind of influence and help building these partnerships across borders and domestically.
I completely agree. I think it's essential to really, like you said, the solution to the crisis is unity in numbers, right?
Yeah.
So we really want to cast that net out and invite folks to become conscious of the situation, of the importance of international relations, and also of the, like you were outlining on the diagram, the opportunity, the commercial opportunity there is important, and because a lot of people's eyes glaze when you start talking about international relations and cyber diplomacy. But actually, there is it's not just about trying to act as diplomats or do what diplomats would do. There is an opportunity there for sharing of best practices. There's an opportunity there for U.S. Companies to engage positively with companies in Latvia, in Estonia, and in other European and NATO countries like Germany, like France, to create stronger and better cyber resilience. And that opportunity for collaboration not only creates a stronger, let's say, alliance of countries, but also at a very concrete level, it helps to create a more sturdy cybersecurity, and it presents commercial opportunities for potential deals, international deals. Is that a fair interpretation, Michael?
Oh, absolutely. If you just look at the investment that has been happening in this region, right? There's what's called the 3Cs Digital Initiative. I forgot what the exact amount of US involvement was, whether they unlocked $3 billion for it, but it doesn't really matter. That's a rather big commercial zone, though. This goes from Estonia all the way down to, I think it includes Romania even, but that is $3 billion across all of this, right? And then you have direct investments happening here and there. I think it is just very important to understand that these budgets that are being created in the US, just like any other company, part of that will end up through outsourcing or through third-party providers, of course, in a secure manner, right? We have these standards like CMMC is coming out, but it's being used as an opportunity, and this is opportunity for the countries as well, right? So for the companies in those countries, right? Because if you're looking at digitized nations like Estonia or Latvia, they have incredible tech talent that can be hired here to work for US businesses, and you don't have to worry about GDPR at that point anymore. But also on the other end, US companies, of course, providing services here, using their expertise. And I think this is beautiful because number one, commerce is amazing. Number two, it really allows us to share the best practices that we independently learn separately from each other. Because some things that might work here will not work in the US and vice versa. But I think this learning exchange is incredibly important.
So remaining on the topic before we jump onto Miguel's question that I see there on the chat,
Yeah.
I have a three-part question for you. So cyber diplomacy, and what you've been describing in your deck, why does it matter to a U.S. CISO? Why does it matter to a U.S. MSP? And why does it matter to a U.S. Vendor of cyber technology?
Okay. So I'm going to take the MSP and I'm going to take the vendor. I'm kind of mashing them together into one category, and I'm taking the CISO as a practitioner into the other category.
Okay.
As a CISO, this matters to you in the following ways. Number one, you're working in a company that's part of society. The society, and as part of that, you are subjected to rules, regulations, and standards. You're being audited against those regulations and standards. By keeping track of the developments that are happening in the regulatory world and the standards world, you are doing proper risk assessment. And your risk assessment should not only, by the way, include like regulatory review, standards review, should also include an environmental review. So if you don't understand what is happening in the international game during a time, this is the most important part, where the international crisis we are facing has vast impact on your society, right? This is not right now a time of peace and I don't know, flowers. Like, this is the international crisis is driving domestic and local decision making. This is why you also as a CISO need to understand that, and you need to understand, maybe you're a CISO in a smaller business. I'm sorry for the background noise. 1 second. Even if you're in a smaller business, you should understand a little bit about the advanced state actors and how they think, because that helps you understand whether maybe I do fit into the targeting pot. Maybe somehow I ended up in this may I end up in this portfolio because I'm providing a service to somebody that provides a service to a telco, and I'm the low-hanging fruit. I'm the slow gazelle. So it helps you change the mind, your own mindset, and improves your risk assessment. beyond being on top of like, hey, maybe there's a way for me to staff my cybersecurity team at incredibly lower cost, by the way, without taking advantage of the local workforce, because what you're going to pay is still going to be really, really amazing. At the same time, getting fantastic skills. For the MSSP, and the vendor, it's way more obvious. Cyber diplomacy drives contracting. And when contracts are being written out, this is your ability to bid on those contracts directly on US government contracts, if you are allowed to do that, if you're registered and all these kind of things, which you probably should, given the amount of budgets that have already been allocated to cyber and AI. The other piece is, if you are involved in this conversation, you are doing thought leadership. You're displaying that you're not just a member of an organization that is just a card holder, but you're actually involved in shaping these giant conversations and dealing with this crisis. And the second part is, while you're doing that, you're going to meet businesses from all over the world that share the same problems that your customers share. And you're walking into that room with a rather large stick because you have now a good reputation. And I have been well received all over the place right now. We're getting a lot of attention. And I think this would be the same for an MSSP or a vendor. And then it drives commercial opportunity.
Well, thank you, Michael. That's a very eloquent response. I'd like to pick up on the question here that we have from Miguel Garibay, which is how does cyber impact privacy and civil liberties? And what are some of the ethical considerations involved in balancing the need for security with the protection of individual rights?
Ooh, that is a question, Miguel, that entire books have been written over. All right. Sorry, everyone. We will have to extend this talk for another 3 hours. I think actually somewhere behind me is a book that is called Private Data Subject Rights in Times of Automated Conflict, which is like, about this big.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a big thing. First off, this is why we only do what we do with like-minded nations and organizations. It's all about shared values, right? What do we value as society? So do we want to be an authoritarian, totalitarian security state? Certainly not. That's not the world I would want my children to grow up in. So we need to keep the balance here. Obviously, we're talking about security and information gathering and intelligence versus privacy and individual subject rights. And I think actually we're doing a better job than most people think. You might have recently heard that that arrests were made in New York two U.S. citizens that were running a Chinese police station in New York. By the way, this is not new. This is not breaking news. People have been warning about this for years, that this was going on. I myself in San Francisco had newspaper reports like once in a while that, again, marked police cars were driving around with Chinese police markings on them and were harassing expatriates. Now, you could ask, like, well, why doesn't anybody jump instantly on that? Well, it's because that's not how things work in a democracy. We can't just randomly accuse people. And if something is very important, we have to make sure that if we go to court with something, it sticks. This is why things take a long while. So number one is we got to keep the balance between national security, safety, protection, and individual rights. The second piece goes more towards ethics even, right? Like for me, by the way, privacy protection and cybersecurity are I don't even really see them as separate. I just don't. There's a legal aspect here when things go to court, but for me, it's basically data protection in a very broad sense, where we're dealing with privacy, plus the legal aspects and the esoterical ethical aspect. So I would say that if we're dealing with ethics, this goes to the point of why it is important that the conversation includes all stakeholders. Why it is so important that it is civilian-led, it happens through the Department of State as well, and through public-private partnerships, because this is when we can make sure we involve people from various organizations and various backgrounds. And the more diversity exists in this process, the better it will be as an outcome for all societies. And this is one reason why we started a very informal right now relationship with our Latinx initiative, right? If you correctly remember that, it's because there are disenfranchised communities and minorities that don't have access to those forums, and by involving them in it, we give them also a voice. And this is absolutely crucial when we're trying to do things that we're talking now more about AI will drastically change society.
Thank you for that. Now, speaking of the business opportunities, because I know that some of the listeners that I know we're going to be joining were particularly interested in that aspect. How can the ISAO help in concrete terms? How can it help a U.S. company to do better business within the NATO community? What could they expect out of that relationship?
Well, there are a couple of things. Number one, I think it's our experience in dealing with regulatory agencies, dealing with governments, and also having direct local representation in these areas, right? I maintain an apartment in Riga, so I'm not going to call myself a local, but it's this tie-in into those local communities that is really a massive difference. Lots of channel marketing companies may go in, have like an email database and say like, oh, okay, these are like the 10 companies in the Baltics you should talk to. And these are the email addresses of 3 important people doing commercial outreach, I don't know, on the Department of State or like on their end, the Latvian Foreign Ministry. But by actually having like local contacts, we can help quite a bit putting you in contact with people. The second piece then is, of course, by doing thought leadership, by being present at events, by holding a presentation and talking about subject matter that you have expertise in, you're being put in front of those individuals and of local companies as well. And through our representation, we consistently get approached about project opportunities. Our challenge is never to get approached or to be heard or to have a something offered to us. The biggest challenge is to actually then go in and source it and find the right partner that we trust to go and make the connection. Hey, you need to talk to this person in this ministry or at this company for giant projects. I mean, we've been approached things that were like, I think the biggest was last year in SciCon. I'm not going to name anything, but it would have been like $100 million plus. I think it was 150 if that would have happened. So, and by becoming a member of us, you have the opportunity to be part of such a massive project potentially.
And as far as I can tell, from what I've seen, you are probably one of very few ISAOs or ISACs that have this international perspective and components, right?
Yeah, I think it primarily, the reason I started this is because of what I experienced at the ISO, right? Like this lack of engagement, this it was just really unsettling to me and a few people. And the ISAO was one of the ways where I could see that happen. And even ISACs, who are more close communities, are slowly starting to look into that. And this is, of course, it's way more difficult to expand for an ISAC. I'm not going to go into this right now, but right now we are, as far as I know, the only one. And we are even getting approached in terms of capacity enhancement. Like people, like, or countries want to learn how to build similar structures on their end. So I think, and by the way, this is not like top secret information, right? Like you can go in theory and read, I don't know, through the 10,000 page standards manual for how to build ISAOs online. It's free available. So, but yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and we're fairly unique as it relates to that.
Yeah. So what would you say are maybe two or three takeaways for CISOs, for MSPs, for vendors that tend to be mostly the audience that is interested in this type of discussion? What could be a few takeaway actions that people can do in order to start getting a little bit more familiar with the world of cyber diplomacy, the opportunities that can emerge out of them, and of course the skill sets that one might need to polish in order to succeed in this area?
Okay, well, let's start with one piece. Number one, show interest, right? That's the biggest thing. So understand that this is relevant, this is matters, because it affects you, your family, your society, your company, your business, everything. So you need to start looking, actively seek out information around those big challenges that we are facing from the global perspective. Just because you're living in one giant country does not mean you're completely shut off from those impactors. Once you realize that, get involved. And of course, I would love if everybody comes to us and says you're getting involved with you. But I'm going to try to stay objective, and I'm going to say, look, the most important thing is that you become part of the conversation. If you choose us and you want to become part of the conversation with us, I will be very, very happy. But I think there's a lot more in general just needed from public engagement. Take an active position, whether it is by commenting on standards, regulations, whether it has to do with joining meetup groups that might already exist, or attending conferences and just meeting people that work in this field. For example, the NATO's conference in cyber conflict, which is hosted in Tallinn at the end of May. People from all over the world are attending. Lots of people working in cyber warfare. And by the way, if you're looking for good SecOps people or for good cyber defenders as a business, as a CISO, I would go there for sure. You're going to find some top talent. Finally, how to get the skills. That's a rough one, because you're dealing here with strategic partnership alliance building. You need to kind of, yeah, actually, I don't know how to answer that. Maybe Carlo, you have some ideas, because cyber itself is this giant domain. Like, what does not fall into it? And then now you're adding foreign relations to it, marketing, sales, strategic partnership. Maybe I'm overblowing the question. I don't know.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think it is all of those things. What I would say on my side is not to be scared to take that step, right? Don't let it overwhelm you. Your voice is waiting to be heard. Your opinion is waiting to be shared. And there are other folks there that are just waiting really for that conversation. Everybody's got some tremendous value to bring to this discussion, and it's only together that we can actually make an impact and become stronger against our cyber adversaries. And also, adversarial and conflict aside, that's the way that we're going to build stronger societies and more resilient critical infrastructure, more resilient cybersecurity postures. We have a really interesting question here that's just come in from Dr. Edvinas Meskis. I will read it out to you, and
Okay.
so that it's clear
Edwin,
for
by the way,
everyone.
hi.
Emerging technologies such as deepfakes, ChatGPT and others create new possibilities for customers. However, these new systems might become a great platform for unfriendly countries for gaining access to a lot of confidential information, open doors for cyber attacks.
No.
Usually, it's very hard to identify these bad actors due to different regulations. Actors are from different countries, etc. Would you see the need for an international body which could fight against these threats? These threats.
Yes, 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 and yes. Whether there needs to be a new international body, that's I'm going to put a question mark on this, because I think there's a lot of good bodies that exist. I'm going to talk about this in a second. But do we need to tie those bodies better into society and give more awareness to them? Then the answer will be again yes. So first off, absolutely. ChatGPT or ChatGPT 9000, whatever we want to call it, LLMs and any type of AI-based system that is using a ton of data and that allows you to add to the data set without any type of real safeguards by you just plugging your information directly into it is a massive concern. And if you've read the weekly intelligence briefing, by the way, that we're releasing every week, there were plenty of mishaps recently, from Samsung uploading like entire chipset specifications to the early problems that existed when it came to session read. So yes, it's a concern. And yes, we need to figure out how to address that. Now, what are the correct avenues here? Well, number one is, of course, we need to have more standards, more regulations. I know nobody wants to hear that, but I think like it's very important that we definitely create more standards related to AI systems. That's already ongoing at the ISO, the International Standards Organization. And number two, regulations. Specifically, I think in the US, we need to figure out what to do with privacy laws. Most of the privacy laws we have are based on what, like the 1968 Privacy Act or whatever it was, that basically still assumes letters are being sent by mail. Yeah, that's not going to work anymore with the situation we're in. In terms of international bodies to deal with this situation directly, right? Well, how does cyber threat intelligence look like for AI-based systems? It's a big question that we always get, like, oh, well, AI cybersecurity, AI cyber threat intel, how is this going to work? Well, actually, 80% of it is not much different from other technology systems. At the end of the day, you have systems, data centers that sit together and that have all the same problems that regular information systems have. So there's a lot of commonly shared issues here and a lot of the same threat actors. But what you will see is and this is already happening, threat actors will specialize on what's called actions on objective. So once I have AI systems compromised, what can I actually do once I have access to them? Whether it's learning set poisoning or something else. And that is where the specifics will happen. I think what I would like to see is again, that we kind of create this network of ISAO-like organizations, that this happens in other countries as well, because CERT is very much focused on critical infrastructure. And that with that, we're starting to drive this dialogue and we're starting to drive the exchange of relevant threat information, specifically also outside of critical infrastructure. This is so important because it's one thing to be the challenges, the problems that you're facing and your mitigation strategies as critical infrastructure, and which is mostly organizational technology, OT and not IT, and normal business are not the same. If I have a company with 200 people, which is already not a small business, my solution is not to create a cyber warfare threat intel center with 5,000 people, right? I'm not NATO. I can't go in and do that. So my ways of solving these issues are completely different. And that's, again, where an ISAO fits into the picture, because we can provide you with the threat intel. So you don't need to have threat intel analysts or team.
I think that's a great point you made. And I'm really glad that you brought in the subject of operational technology, because that's where cybersecurity makes things explode.
Yeah.
And that's another reason to take it really seriously and to use all means at our disposal, including cyber diplomatic outreach, in order to make things safer for our community. Well, listen, Michael, thank you very much for this great session. We really got a lot out of this. Your questions were beautifully answered. and the slide deck was very, very compelling. So for those that are interested, we will be posting the video on our website, and also it'll be visible through LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel. And I see Edwina said, thanks, makes a lot of sense. And so for anybody that's interested in becoming a member of the ISAO, what would you say would be the next logical steps, Michael? Just to wrap it up.
Like always, get in touch with us, and then, right, there's like different membership options that we have, from individual members to organizational members. Get in touch with us and start a conversation. Let's start there, and then we'll see where we will take it. Some membership options might not be appropriate for certain companies. Maybe you want something smaller, but one important thing to let you know is we are onboarding quite the amount of technology partners as well. And those technology partners are offering their services, either discounted or even for free, integrate into our service offerings in some way or another to members of the ISAO. So again, if you don't have the budget for a dark web scanning tool, well, we got something for you.
Excellent. Excellent. No, that's all very, very exciting. And I hope, I think this was a really interesting and a really nice fireside chat. And I look forward to having perhaps additional ones on other topics.
I would absolutely love that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody.